Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
This morning we've woken to the news that the President of the United States of America has fired the man who's meant to be overseeing an investigation into the President of the United States of America. James Comey, the head of the FBI, was scrutinising alleged links between Mr. Trump's presidential election campaign team and Russia, which is accused of trying to influence last year's result. ABC's Lana Zak has filed this report from Washington.
James Comey boarded a plane in Los Angeles, deciding not to attend an FBI event after learning he had been fired as the head of the FBI, effective immediately. President Trump writing, "It is essential that we find new leadership for the FBI that restores public trust and confidence." The White House says that the president was influenced in part by the recommendation of his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who had recused himself from the Russia investigation. And that has Senate Democrats concerned about the future of the ongoing FBI investigation into Russian influence over the election. Comey was overseeing it, and some saying now that his firing demonstrates a pattern.
They fired Sally Yates. They fired Preet Bharara, and now they fired Director Comey.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said a special investigator must now be appointed, and if not,
every American will rightly suspect that the decision to fire Director Comey was part of a cover-up.
The controversial Comey had drawn ire from both Democrats and Republicans at various times. Just days before the presidential election, Comey was responsible for a bombshell announcement that he would be reopening the investigation into Clinton's emails. He later testified on the ramifications of that decision.
Look, this was terrible. It makes me mildly nauseous to think that we might have had some impact on the election. But honestly, it wouldn't change the decision. Everybody who disagrees with me has to come back to October 28th with me and stare at this and tell me what you would do. Would you speak or would you conceal? And I could be wrong, but we honestly made a decision between those two choices that even in hindsight, and this has been one of the world's most painful experiences, I would make the same decision. I would not conceal that.
And it's not just Democrats that are concerned about the timing of Comey's firing. Many Republicans are calling it fishy. In fact, the Senate Intelligence Committee chairman, a Republican, said his dismissal further complicates an already difficult investigation. Lana Zak, ABC News, Washington.
Well, Mr. Comey only found out he was fired when he was handed a note as he was giving a speech to his own staff. And it was the letter from President Trump where it effectively said, you cannot head the FBI anymore, and it's vital to find new leadership to restore public trust and confidence in your law enforcement mission. The president actually wrote, "You are hereby terminated, removed from office, effective immediately." Donald Trump's press secretary, advisor, Kellyanne Conway, defended the sacking of Mr. Comey. She was speaking to CNN host Anderson Cooper. Just have a look at the rolling of his eyes in this clip.
So now your White House is saying that what he did was wrong, but previously, as a candidate, Donald Trump was saying it was the right thing.
You're conflating two things that don't belong together. Thanks for the trip down memory lane. I was on your show often last fall saying we were going to win Michigan and how we were going to do it. So that was the White House. The President of the United States
So that person doesn't exist anymore. Candidate Donald Trump, that's a fictional character we no longer are allowed to refer to. We can now only refer to the Donald Trump who exists today.
Anderson, I'll ignore how unkind that is. And all I'll say is, as President of the United States, he needs confidence in his FBI director, and he doesn't have it.
And here's an audio exchange with the White House press secretary, Sean Spicer.
The letter was presented to the president today, both letters. Obviously, the underlying letter is that you all received is the Deputy Attorney General's letter, or memo, whatever you want to call it, and then the letter from the Attorney General concurring were presented to the president today. He concurred with their recommendation and made the decision to move forward. There is clearly at this point no evidence of a reason to do that. You have a system that's working. You have a career prosecutor that lost confidence in the FBI director's ability to carry out his responsibilities. An FBI director who is equally questioned by numerous folks from the left who all said that they had a problem. The FBI director reports through the deputy attorney general. Rod Rosenstein was confirmed on April 25th, 2 weeks ago, by a vote of 94-6 in a very obviously bipartisan manner. This is something, he is a career prosecutor. I think he's the longest serving, don't fact check me on this, but I believe he's the longest serving U.S. attorney. He served under Obama for the U.S. attorney for Maryland. He's very familiar with the Department of Justice, obviously the FBI, and he made a decision, clearly, based on the letter that he submitted, that the FBI director had lost his confidence.
So was his sacking part of a cover-up? Let's talk to our security correspondent Gordon Carrera, and we can also speak in a moment to Zania Wickett, who worked at the White House and the State Department during George W. Bush's time as president. She's now head of the US and Americas program at Chatham House. Gordon Carrera, many people are asking, well, what was James Comey onto? What did he found out?
Well, I think that's the problem for Donald Trump, is that is exactly the question. Despite the idea that this was to do with Hillary Clinton's emails and his announcements during that, I think very few people will buy that line from the White House. I think almost everyone will think this was to do with the Russia inquiry and that in some way James Comey was not playing ball or was pushing too hard or was doing something. That will be the assumption in Washington which people are already working on. I think it just doesn't make sense for this to have been about Hillary Clinton because Donald Trump praised his decision to announce an inquiry into Hillary Clinton and to the reopening of it just before the election. So that just doesn't quite hold up as an argument, which means all the attention will be on what James Comey and the FBI were doing. Now, there is some reports that, for instance, they've been making some progress in terms of potential indictments against some of the people who had been linked to the Trump campaign. Now, it's not really clear how much evidence there is and what that might be or how close it gets to Donald Trump itself. But if that is the case, then I think that will raise a lot of pressure on the White House if that does come out and get confirmed.
What do we read into the timing of this now?
Well, it is strange because there wasn't an obvious public reason to do it now, especially if the White House idea is that it was about Hillary Clinton, which happened months ago. I mean, there was this hearing by James Comey a couple of weeks ago in which he appeared before Congress and which he made some comments about some of the emails to do with Hillary Clinton, and it appears he might have slightly misspoken or exaggerated, and that been picking up a bit of attention in the American media. And I suppose that could be used as an excuse by the White House to say, well, that's why, because we'd lost trust in him over that. But I think, you know, James Comey is someone who had, I mean, he didn't necessarily have bipartisan support because a lot of Democrats were angry with him for his role in the Hillary Clinton investigation. But he was seen as someone who was rigorous and independent. In the Bush administration, he'd stood up to the White House over some of the surveillance programs. And I think for those reasons, he was seen as someone all sides could at least think was an independent, serious figure. And with him gone, I think the questions are there about who will replace him and what the relationship there will be with the White House.
Let me bring in Zania Wickett then, head of the US and Americas program at Chatham House and worked at the White House and State Department during George W. Bush's time as president. Hello, what do you think is going on?
I think I agree with Gordon. I mean, what is your attitude as to how you think this has been handled depends on where you sit. The reality is that most Democrats did not like Comey after he revealed what he did about the Clinton emails back in the summer, and then a few days before the election he made a statement saying he was reopening the investigation against Clinton given her email use. And then, of course, many Republicans don't like him because he continues to pursue links between the Trump administration, or at least people who have worked closely to Trump, and the Russians and Russian involvement in the election. And so he's actually in this kind of uncomfortable position in one hand, that he is not trusted by Democrats and he's not trusted by Republicans, which of course, as Gordon suggests, lays out that actually, arguably, he's quite independent. If you're not trusted by both sides, that tells you you're probably doing something right. But again, as Gordon says, this is really about, this appears to be about, based on the timing, based on what's going on, based on what Donald Trump has said historically about Comey, one can only assume that what motivated him to act now was Comey's continued investigations into links between Russia and the Trump administration and Russian involvement in the election.
What happens now in terms of, Gordon, in terms of getting a new director of the FBI?
Well, there may be acting officials in the interim, but it will be up to the White House to appoint someone. And of course, I mean, that's going to be a hugely significant appointment.
And the Senate could get in the way of blocking
and there's also
that.
the Department of Justice.
Right.
The Attorney General has already had to recuse himself from the Russia investigation because some previous issues there to do with him and whether he declared everything about his contacts. So they've got already this mess about who's overseeing it. Is there independent enough oversight? I think for James Comey, I think one of the problems, if you go back to what he did, he made this announcement about the Clinton emails on the eve of the election, which is the pretext for Donald Trump now removing him. And I think almost certainly when he made that announcement, he probably thought Hillary Clinton was going to win, and he was protecting himself, if you like, against the Clinton victory, and then being able to say, well, I didn't cover up an investigation, I was honest and open about it. And I think he, like everyone else, didn't perhaps really think that Donald Trump could win, and suddenly it's placed all his decisions in a different context in which he's suddenly vulnerable because of having spoken out about the Clinton emails. So he really was left without actually that many allies and friends other than people who wanted someone there who was had the appearance at least of being independent.
Zania Wickett, from your own past experience, from your own CV, I mean, how bad is it when a president falls out spectacularly like this with who's head of the FBI?
Well, I think you've asked the right question, which is the answer to that second question is the one you just asked Gordon. What does he do now? Who does he appoint? If Donald Trump decides to put forward a name that is non-partisan, that is independent, that is seen as such, that can get bipartisan support, then I think he will have sent a very, very strong and positive message. If, however, he puts forward somebody who's clearly not bipartisan, who is seen very much as excuse the phraseology, but a lackey of the Republicans, then he's going to have a real problem. Right now, what is clear is the tenor of the letter he sent to Comey and subsequent comments has actually antagonized many in the FBI. So he's got a real trust problem that he needs to figure out how to respond to.
Gordon, there's a bit in the New York Times suggesting that when James Comey was handed this letter, as he was addressing his staff, he thought it was a joke. He thought it was a prank.
I mean, it's astonishing because he supposedly was in an FBI office in Los Angeles and saw it on the news and saw it appearing on the news as a news flash and receives a letter saying you've been dismissed. So clearly he had no expectation that this was coming. I don't think anyone did. I mean, that's one of the astonishing things about this. Normally in Washington things leak at least maybe an hour or two before they happen, but in this case, not at all. I think Zani's right as well about what would be the reaction within the FBI. I mean, the FBI is a kind of quite proudly independent organisation. It sees itself as tough prosecutors who go where the investigation leads them. How will they feel about their head being removed in such circumstances? What will the mood be? How will they react? Will they start briefing and leaking as well? What will we start learning about the investigation as a result? Yeah.
We're just going to play our audience this. It's interesting. It just reminds people about the relationship Donald Trump has had with the FBI since being a presidential candidate.
He's become more famous than me. This is all bad judgment. Probably illegal. We'll have to find out what the FBI says about it. But certainly it was bad judgment. I just read the report. It's devastating, the report.
Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, there is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information.
Based on what was being said, she was guilty. She was guilty. And it turned out that we're not going to press charges. It's really amazing. Today is the best evidence ever that we've seen that our system is absolutely, totally rigged.
It sure looks real careless to me. The question of whether that amounts to gross negligence, frankly, there's no way anybody at the Department of Justice is bringing a case against John Doe or Hillary Clinton.
that the FBI is reopening their investigation. I have to give the FBI credit. That was so bad what happened originally, and it took guts for Director Comey to make the move that he made in light of the kind of opposition he had. What he did, he brought back his reputation. He's become more famous than me.
The FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. And that includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government. With respect to the president's tweets about alleged wiretapping directed at him by the prior administration, I have no information that supports those tweets.
Astonishing turnaround in terms of Donald Trump's opinion of James Comey, isn't it, Gordon? Thank you, our security correspondent Gordon Carrera and Zaina Wickett. Thank you from Chatham House, the US head of the US and America's programme. Quick word from Peter. All I hear actually is gossip on this, unreal speculation and ridiculous guessing. Maybe you could stop your Chinese whispers until or when you have actual evidence of anything. This gossip-based programme on Trump, when you have... Oh no, I'll leave that there. Tweet from Hayes. This whole Comey firing is nothing more than Trump running scared. He knows they are onto him.
Washington is awash with rumour and speculation tonight after President Donald Trump's shock dismissal of James Comey, the director of the FBI. In the president's words, Mr. Comey was not doing a good job. There's been widespread criticism of the move. Political opponents have raised the suspicion that Mr. Comey's dismissal was linked to his investigation into allegations that members of the Trump team colluded with Moscow during last year's presidential election. Here's our North America editor, John Sopel.
This is a Fox News alert. FBI Director James Comey has been fired by the President of the United States.
The term breaking news is bandied around with abandon. Last night it was justified, because at FBI offices, the first they knew that their director had been fired was when it flashed up on their TV screens. And James Comey, who was in Los Angeles addressing staff, knew nothing about it either until an aide handed him a note. And the letter sent by President Trump was brutal. You are hereby terminated and removed from office, effective immediately. At least they left him the government jet to fly back to the East Coast. A private citizen, a turbulent career cut short. And today the president was unrepentant.
Why did you fire Director Comey? Because he wasn't doing a good job, very simply. He was not doing a good job.
James Comey, the 6'8" tall FBI director, was the person who confirmed in bombshell testimony in March that the Trump campaign was under investigation for its links to Russia during the election.
The FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election.
The president has railed consistently that it's fake news and there's been no improper contact. Last night, he fired the man heading the inquiry. It's caused fury and dismay among some Republicans and all Democrats.
If there was ever a time when circumstances warranted a special prosecutor, it is right now.
But the White House is seeking to persuade people that the decision to fire Comey had nothing to do with Russia or the FBI investigation.
It was time for a fresh start at the FBI. And I think the president did, as he's done in so many other cases. He took decisive action. He provided strong leadership to act on the recommendation of the Deputy Attorney General.
The White House says the loss of confidence stems from James Comey's investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server from when she was Secretary of State.
I made a mistake using a private email.
He decided last July there'd be no prosecution, just a rap on the knuckles. Republicans were furious. Then, stunningly, he reopened his inquiry 11 days before polling.
And it took guts for Director Comey to make the move that he made.
But if it really is all about the way the FBI conducted the Hillary Clinton investigation, why sack him now? Why this intervention? Why not do it when Donald Trump first came to office? And how do you reconcile it with the praise that was heaped upon James Comey? Whatever, it's left the FBI feeling very sore about the way their director's been treated.
And into the Washington maelstrom, who should arrive today for his first visit to see the Trump administration? Why, none other than Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, in jokey mood.
Was he fired? You are kidding.
He then went to meet Donald Trump at the White House. But curiously, for the camera-loving president, the press was kept away. This feels like House of Cards on steroids.
And John is in Washington for us now. John, can you remember any president in the past behaving anything like this?
Well, the only other director of the FBI to be fired, that happened some 20-odd years ago when Bill Clinton fired his director of the FBI. But I think the real parallel you want to go back to is 1973. Embattled Richard Nixon, the president, facing the Watergate investigation, and he tried to fire the chief prosecutor, and that kind of eventually a year later ended up in Richard Nixon's resignation as president. But there's something very interesting in Donald Trump's resignation letter last night in which he fired James Comey. He said, "I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I'm not under investigation." James Comey has never said that publicly, and you're left to wonder whether that was part of the reason why Donald Trump made clear his displeasure and fired him. One other thing, this is kind of about at a time when there is a fever-pitch atmosphere in Washington, and Donald Trump has done nothing to dissipate that.
John, thank you.
America is still reeling tonight after Donald Trump's shock decision to fire the director of the country's senior law enforcement agency, the FBI. The president today defended his sacking of James Comey, saying people would be thanking him when things calm down. Well, despite denials from the Trump camp, many of his opponents say this is all about the FBI investigation into alleged links between Russia and the presidential campaign. It's now being claimed Mr. Comey had asked for more resources for the probe. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore has the latest.
Good morning. First the firing, now the fallout.
It was a stunning development that caught even this town, with all of its leaks and rumours, completely by surprise.
He's become more famous than me.
Never before has an American president fired an FBI director who is actively investigating him. And a short time ago, Trump, while meeting with Henry Kissinger, made his first comment on the firestorm that he's ignited, but still revealed almost nothing about his real motive.
Director Comey, why did you fire Director Comey?
Because he wasn't doing a good job, very simply. He was not doing a good job.
James Comey himself only found out about his dismissal from media reports while in California. News helicopters scrambled to track his return to Washington amid rampant speculation that the real reason the director had been fired was to shut down his investigation into links between Trump associates and the Kremlin.
The first question the administration has to answer is why now? I have said from the get-go that I think a special prosecutor is the way to go, but now, with what's happened, it is the only way to go. Only way to go to restore the American people's faith. Are people going to suspect cover-up? Absolutely.
But the vice president is in full damage control mode, saying there is no Russian connection.
That's not what this was about. The president took strong and decisive leadership here to put the safety and security of the American people first by accepting the recommendation of the Deputy Attorney General.
In a bizarre twist, the Russian foreign minister is in town.
Does the Comey firing cast a shadow of your talk, gentlemen?
Was he fired?
Yes.
You are kidding. You are kidding.
Sergei Lavrov mocking the media, pretending he knew nothing of a story that is reverberating across Washington. The main problem for the White House is that few believe the official explanation for the Comey firing, that the FBI director mishandled the Hillary Clinton email scandal. After all, on the campaign trail, Trump had applauded that very intervention by Comey.
And it took guts for Director Comey to make the move that he made in light of the kind of opposition he had.
There are many dangers now lurking for the Trump White House. Not least that Comey seeks revenge on the president who last night humiliated him and reveals what he knows about those ongoing Russian investigations. Well, it's now being widely reported here that actually only last week James Comey had asked the Department of Justice for more resources to expand his investigation into those alleged links between Trump associates and Russian officials. So in the eyes of many here on Capitol Hill, that only adds to the suspicion of why exactly Comey was fired. Remember, Trump has already dismissed the acting Attorney General, Sally Yates. He has dismissed a senior prosecutor in Manhattan. He has asked the National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn, to leave, and now Comey. That is quite some body count, with no one predicting what happens next.
Robert Moore in Washington. Thank you.
To America, President Trump has defended his shock decision to fire the FBI Director, James Comey. In the last few minutes, the White House has claimed he'd been considering it since the day he took office. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris is outside FBI headquarters. Kylie.
John, I'm at headquarters, the J. Edgar Hoover building, where today the FBI is without a director. Now, this is where President Trump's letter of dismissal was hand-delivered late yesterday for James Comey, just that door over there. But, of course, the director, in fact, wasn't here. He was in Los Angeles, where we're told he was briefing a room full of agents when news of his sacking broke on headlines across the TV monitors behind him. At first, he thought it was an elaborate prank by the agents, but was soon persuaded, yes, this really just happened. It is the most stunning, singular, unprecedented act thus far by the new president, and it has shaken those fearful that the institutions of American democracy are under attack. The president says the problem with James Comey was that he just wasn't doing a good job.
This was a stunning move. The shockwaves are still reverberating this morning.
It is such a defiance of the rule of law. Are people going to suspect cover-up? Absolutely.
Comey was fired because of the Russians.
This is not a town easily shocked, even in the time of Trump, but the sacking of James Comey caught Washington unawares. Without warning, the towering figure of Director Comey at the helm of the investigation into Russian influence on last year's presidential election was fired by America's CEO, Donald Trump.
Why did you fire Director Comey? Why did you fire Director Comey?
Because he wasn't doing a good job, very simply. He was not doing a good job.
The FBI has reopened.
That wasn't always Donald Trump's view. On the campaign trail, he cheered when Director Comey revived the case against his rival Hillary Clinton.
And it took guts for Director Comey to make the move that he made in light of the kind of opposition he had.
He's become more famous than me.
After he took office, President Trump greeted Comey like a favorite son. But then Director Comey turned his focus toward investigating possible links between Russia and the Trump campaign, speaking just as boldly and openly as he had about Hillary Clinton's emails.
The FBI is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. And that includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts.
He refused to give cover to the president's false claims that President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. The president called his investigation a total hoax, but couldn't make it go away. This morning, though, the vice president said this has nothing to do with that.
Russian official. That's not what this was about. The president took strong and decisive leadership here to put the safety and security of the American people first.
So what were the reasons? The White House provided them in triplicate. The Deputy Attorney General cited Comey's original decision last July not to recommend charges against Hillary Clinton. I don't understand his refusal to accept the nearly universal judgment that he was mistaken. His boss, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, added, "I've concluded that a fresh start is needed at the leadership of the FBI." The president's letter to Director Comey sounded a little defensive. While I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I'm not under investigation, I nevertheless concur with the Department of Justice that you're not able to effectively lead the Bureau.
We are here to protect the American people.
Director Comey had travelled to the West Coast last night to speak at an FBI recruiting event in Hollywood. But would-be agents were left to watch a video celebrating career prospects at the Bureau, even as its sacked director headed for the airport to fly home. Late night at the White House, and communications staff scrambled in the dark to brief journalists on the dismissal.
Hold on, no, let's talk for a minute.
This morning on Capitol Hill, even some Republicans woke up with a political hangover.
Well, I'd like to see a fuller explanation of why the decision was made.
The White House's timing here was less than impeccable, and I think the president's selection of a new FBI director may be the most important selection he'll make while he's president.
While some Republicans were nervous, the Democrats were incandescent.
It defies logic that James Comey was fired because of how he handled the Clinton case. The president of the United States during the campaign led the cheers of lock her up.
History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And this moment in our nation's history has very much the feel of the Nixonian Saturday Night Massacre, when our democracy equally was at risk.
As for the White House insistence that this was Donald Trump recognising a wrong done to Hillary Clinton, her campaign manager told me he's not buying it.
Donald Trump is not interested in helping Hillary Clinton, and the fact that that's the excuse he's giving for why he did this is just laughable.
It's clear the president is moving on. You've got to assume the messaging was deliberate. He met this morning in the Oval Office with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the much-investigated other Sergei, Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. I should just say that lying about undisclosed meetings with Ambassador Kislyak firstly cost Mike Flynn, the National Security Advisor, his job, and secondly forced the Attorney General Jeff Sessions to recuse himself from the investigation into Russia. So a deliberately controversial photo op for the president there.
Well, Kylie, what about the possibility of another force entering this, the appointment of a special prosecutor?
But the White House has already said they don't think that's necessary, as you might expect. I think the problem is, John, that there isn't a critical mass of Republicans coming out to support their Democratic counterparts who are calling for a special prosecutor. But this certainly doesn't mean that the investigation is over. Already, the Senate Intelligence Committee has said James Comey may not have that job anymore, but we still want him to appear at a hearing next Tuesday. So their inquiries are going to continue, certainly. The leaks have already begun, as you might expect, from disenchanted FBI investigators, suggestions that Comey had been asking for more money for the investigation, and that had been refused. Of course, we can't independently confirm that. But while President Trump might have been seeking to kind of get rid of the Russian issue, to try and make it disappear, this seems to have done the absolute opposite.
Kylie Morris in Washington.
So, a president fires the head of the Internal Security Service on perplexing grounds that are months old, just as that security service is investigating the president's own campaign team. Doesn't sound like the US, but it is. Today, the New York Times reported that the terminated director of the FBI, James Comey, had just been asking for more resources for his investigation into Russian connections to the Trump campaign. Was he sacked to thwart an inconvenient investigation, or do we believe the Trump line that Mr. Comey had lost the trust of Democrats and Republicans alike, and the FBI needed a fresh start? Well, for many, the president has crossed a dangerous threshold. The Constitution has checks and balances on his power, but it has to allow him some discretion, and to them, he's broken the spirit of US convention by exploiting his powers to an entirely self-interested end. Our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, is with me. I mean, Mark, in sort of FBI terms, history of the FBI, how big a deal is it for a director to be sacked?
I think, like a good barrister, you know the answer to this question, Evan. One has been sacked before, and he was sacked by Bill Clinton back in '93. William Sessions. People said, oh, this was a Nixonian move. Well, Nixon fired the special prosecutor who had been appointed to investigate the Watergate burglary. So that's where there are parallels. I mean, consternation in Washington today, and all sorts of versions coming out of a beleaguered president who hadn't been out for days, becoming obsessed with this Russia issue, looking for a pretext, not telling anyone, finally boiling over and doing it. Now, of course, that's from anti-Trump media, but a couple of interesting circumstantial signs. It's true, he hadn't been doing public engagements in recent days. And it's also true that even his press people seemed unaware until moments before this happened that it was going to happen. They've been putting out some other lines today on background like, oh, we thought the Democrats would really like this and be supportive because of the whole Hillary Clinton saga. Look, the key to this is everybody has jumped to their own conclusion about why it happened, and that's largely to do with the Russia thing. But of course, that Russia investigation will go on.
Yeah. Well, as Mark says, it all comes back to the investigation of connections between the Trump campaign and the Russians. No one has produced evidence of it yet, but there is a lurking suspicion or allegation that Team Trump might have encouraged, coordinated, or been in some way complicit with Russian hacking of the Clinton team's emails. If that was true, well, let's just say it's not a good thing to do. Paul Wood is in Washington and looks at what's left of the investigations into the Russian connection to the Trump campaign.
The political melodrama House of Trump is a ratings smash, but at times it's a little dark. And the plot does stretch credulity. In part one, the FBI investigates whether the Trump campaign conspired with a foreign power, Russia, to steal the US presidential election. In part two, Trump fires the FBI director James Comey. The audience is left to wonder why.
Everybody knows Dr. Kissinger.
It wasn't to derail the FBI investigation, the president insists. And yes, that is Henry Kissinger next to him. The questions, naturally, were about Comey's sacking.
Because he wasn't doing a good job, very simply. He was not doing a good job.
The president wrote a terse letter to Comey, saying it was vital to restore public trust and confidence in the FBI. Significantly, he recalled Comey informing me on 3 separate occasions that I am not under investigation. At the White House briefing, an avalanche of skepticism.
Look, I think it was something that far above my pay grade was decided to be included. And again, I'm not going to get into the specifics of that. Thanks, guys, so much.
Trump's critics paint a different picture. They don't believe Comey was sacked, as the White House says, because he was too tough on Hillary Clinton. The White House should perhaps recall what another president, LBJ, said about another FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover. Better to have him inside the tent pissing out than outside pissing in. It is a delicious irony that Russia's foreign minister should be visiting Washington today to see Mr. Trump.
You're kidding. You're kidding.
Such insouciance is impressive. Never forget that the US intelligence agencies all say that Russia did interfere in the election and that they did it to put President Trump in office.
Raise your right hand, please.
That assessment was made by James Clapper when he was Director of National Intelligence. He told Congress this week that Russia had hacked leading Democrats and then leaked out damaging information in a sophisticated propaganda campaign.
They must be congratulating themselves for having exceeded their wildest expectations with a minimal expenditure of resource. And I believe they are now emboldened to continue such activities in the future, both here and around the world, and to do so even more intensely.
No evidence has been made public proving that the Trump campaign did conspire with Russia. Nothing. There's no evidence either for the claim that the Kremlin is blackmailing the president using a tape of him with prostitutes in Moscow. Nor has it yet been shown that Trump's business dealings put him in hock to the Russians. But the FBI investigation will continue after Comey's departure. There are also 4 separate congressional inquiries. All these investigations now have many more questions following the events of the past 24 hours. Why was Comey sacked? What does he know that's yet to be made public? And was Trump reassured that he himself was not the subject of an investigation? Washington echoes to talk that a special prosecutor might be appointed. Inevitably, the president's critics compare this to Watergate.
There is a clear and present danger of a cover-up. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And this firing has very much the look and feel of an effort to stop or stymie an investigation and politically interfere with it.
It's true.
Not since Watergate has a president dismissed the person leading an investigation bearing on him. But President Trump may be right that only his aides and associates are being targeted now. Then the question will be that which came to define Watergate. What did the president know, and when did he know it?
Paul Wood there. Well, Mark Urban is still with me. Mark, how much of a danger do you think this Russia investigation is to President Trump?
Well, look, we know the idea that mesmerises the intelligence community, ex-Director Comey and others, as well as the president's political opponents. It is that there is some kind of connectivity that is provable between the Trump campaign and the hacking and leaking of emails during last year's presidential election. That is clearly the main thing they're going for. There are all sorts of other peripheral issues to do with money, possible meetings, coordinating policy, all these other things. But that's, I think, the central thing they want to prove. Now, clearly, if they get there, if it is possible to prove that connection of people meeting, of maybe money going, or actual connectivity. Oh yes, let's leak this one in the coming days. Then it's an absolute major bombshell. But they're a long way off, and the president's defences are still holding up in certain respects. So today, for example, more than 75 Democrats and independents joined the call for the appointment of a special prosecutor. No Republicans, just 3 Republicans in the Congress and the Senate, led by the indomitable John McCain, backed the idea of a special committee of inquiry. So on the Hill, his defences are holding up. Self-evidently, they haven't got to the point where they could launch a charge against individuals on these very serious potential allegations. And of course, even if they do, they may well be arm's-length associates, people who were dismissed from the campaign at some point during the campaign. And it may be, if there is, in the end, a parallel to Watergate, the attempts to cover up or disrupt investigations that could finally do for him.
Mark, thank you. Well, one concern is whether the president is somehow undermining the institutions of the US, politicising justice and damaging morale of the FBI and potentially the Department of Justice too. The kind of thing that you might expect of lesser countries. We're going to talk to Sidney Blumenthal, a senior aide to Bill Clinton, who worked at the Clinton Foundation. But first, to Charlotte Laws, an author and political commentator who was one of President Trump's earliest supporters. Charlotte Laws, why do you think the president acted now on this? This question of why now seems to be the one that has had least satisfactory answers.
Well, I think that it was a cumulative effect. I think it had been building like a storm for President Trump, and this goes all the way back to January. Comey had been increasingly viewed as a political figure, which is inappropriate for someone who's the director of the FBI. There had been calls from Republicans to sack him. I know here in Los Angeles, I'm an independent, but I know a lot of Republicans, and they were all saying to me all the way back in January, why doesn't Trump fire Comey? So there was this big push for that. And I'm sure Trump had that in his ear, just like I had it in my ear. The Democrats were calling for Comey to be fired during the campaign. You have reports that within the FBI there was disgruntlement, that they were unhappy with the leadership. So that was happening at the same time. You have the controversy from a few days ago where Comey went out and misstated information regarding the emails and Huma Abedin, which created a huge controversy, and he had to come out and change what he had said and clarify it. And then you have the deputy AG who made a recommendation that he be fired. Right. So all of these things had come together, and I think Trump just had an erosion of confidence with respect to Comey.
You've given me a big list there, and you know, people will judge whether they think those things on that list are convincing or not. Do you not think the president should have thought about how it looks? He's being investigated, or his campaign is investigated by the FBI. He sacks the director. Maybe he should have said, I don't like this guy, but I'm going to wait till the investigation is over before I sack him.
Well, I think you don't do something like this unless you have a pure heart. So it's kind of like if your detractors, your enemies say, you stole a red Corvette, you don't go out and borrow a red Corvette, stick it in your driveway and flaunt it if you don't have a pure heart. And I think that his detractors would have criticized him no matter when he fired Comey. First of all, the investigation may not be over for years. And second of all, if he had done it back in January when he first came into office, he still would have been criticized for the same basic reasons.
Right.
So I think that so many people are anti-Trump in the media and the Democrats and the political figures that it's very hard for him to do anything that's seen as right or proper.
Right. Look, I want to ask you one question, because this one perplexes me. In the letter Trump sent Comey, he used this line, "While I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I am not under investigation," blah, blah, blah. Now, what a strange thing to write. It's as though on Trump's mind, as he's terminating this guy, on his mind is the investigation into his team. And why would you write that in there? It's very strange to me.
Because being president is very much public relations, and he wants to make it clear to America that he is not personally under investigation. And as I understand, he's not under investigation personally. So he wants to make that clear. And I also think the reason why he didn't call Comey himself is because Trump has a reputation of not liking to confront people and make them feel bad. It's very hard for him to fire people. In fact, I've heard many, many people say this with regards to the Trump organization, that he would leave people in the company even though he wanted them to go because he just couldn't bring himself to fire them face to face, or he would get someone else to do it. So I think that's probably the reason why he didn't call him, and that's the reason for that comment in the letter.
I mean, obviously his catchphrase was "you're fired," but ironically you're saying he was incapable of firing people. Charlotte, stay there, because I'm going to go to Sidney Blumenthal now, if I may, and I might come back to you afterwards. Mr. Blumenthal, do you think this is a sort of constitutional crisis, or at least a constitutional moment?
It's certainly a crisis of democracy, and it has been ever since the moment that Donald Trump was inaugurated. He's declared war on a free press. He's called them enemies of the people. There hasn't been that kind of language since Middle Europe in the 1930s against a free press. And he's attacked judges. He's called them so-called judges. He's attacked the judicial system on cases. He's involved in a case attempting to ban people based on their religion from the country.
Mr. Blumenthal, we know all of that. We know all of that. I'm just wondering whether that really undermines the institutions of democracy in the U.S. or whether it's
enormous
just talk.
stress on those institutions. There has not been a president like Donald Trump in the entire history of the United States. Not even Nixon. While Nixon was guilty of crimes, which were the articles of impeachment, there has not been such a systematic assault on the institutions of democracy in the United States than under Donald Trump.
You yourself and many Democrats, and we heard it from Charlotte earlier, basically blamed Comey for losing Hillary Clinton the election. So it's interesting that the Democrats are now the great defenders of Comey, because Comey's now Trump's enemy, so they have to come round and rally round him. What's going on there?
Well, I would say that the proximate cause given for the firing of Comey by the Assistant Attorney General was ridiculous on its face. It's entirely true that Comey is guilty of everything that's listed there and how he behaved. That happened back in July of 2016. After that event, Donald Trump conducted a very public campaign claiming that even though Hillary Clinton had been exonerated, that she should be locked up and that she was a criminal. He even used the Republican convention to express that theme. Mike Flynn led chants of lock her up from the platform of the Republican convention. So this is just ridiculous. Everyone knows this is a ridiculous reason. The reason is that he is attempting to obstruct the investigation into Russia's intervention in the U.S. election.
I mean, that's your charge, you know, and that the investigation or some congressional investigations will continue. But just tell me this, what are you meant to do if you're the President of the United States and you don't like your FBI director and you don't think he's doing a good job, and there's chatter all over the place saying, look, the guy's not up to it? What are you meant to do? You're going to sack him, right?
Well, that's an interesting question. And had he wanted to change his FBI director, who has a term of 9 years, by the way, he could have done that when during his transition or when he first came into office. Instead, he praised him and he had a public meeting with him that was filmed in which he embraced him. So something else has happened, and what we've learned in the last 24 hours is that there's a grand jury that's been convened by James Comey, and that it is hearing testimony from associates of Michael Flynn, whose attorney says he has a story to tell. We've learned that James Comey had asked for a vast increase in funding for his investigation. So there are other elements involved here.
Yeah. Sidney Blumenthal, thanks. Let me briefly go back to you, Charlotte. You've heard it. You're not going to blame anyone, are you, for putting two and two together here and saying he's obviously done this because the guy's leading a pretty effective investigation into his campaign?
Well, I certainly don't think you can read into President Trump's mind. And I think that Trump really wants this investigation to be concluded. I don't think he's trying to thwart it. I think he wants to get it behind him because it's a real handicap to his presidency. So I don't think it's really logical to think that that was the goal behind his actions.
Don't you agree it should be pretty difficult for a president? President has the power to sack the director of the FBI. Don't you think it would be desirable if presidents used that with restraint and they treated it as something fairly difficult to do, maybe thinking about it for a while and having consultations or inquiries?
The sound, actually, I can't quite hear you. It's gotten a little bit rough.
Oh, I was just saying it should be very difficult to sack the director of the FBI, shouldn't it? Not too easy for a president to do that.
Well, I mean, presidents obviously can have anybody they want as the director of FBI. I mean, it's his decision. And I think initially, I don't think he was praising Comey initially. I think he wanted to give him a chance. And when he's face to face with somebody, he has a reputation for getting along with people and getting along with everybody and trying to be friends with people, and in order to oftentimes get them to do what he wants them to do and build relationships. So I don't think that's unusual at all. And it's obviously President Trump's choice. And I think that he very likely has a pure heart in this. I can't read into his mind just like Mr. Blumenthal can't, but that's what I believe.
OK, well, we'll leave it there. Thank you both. Charlotte Law, Sidney Blumenthal, thank you both very much.
I've been getting away with